Well, I just finished up a batch of cutting boards, and I set this one aside without quite getting it finished because I want to try and experiment with it. I want to turn it and make it a circle, end up with a circle cutting board at the end, and that would be fairly easy to just put it on a jig and throw it in the bandsaw, or you can do it on a table saw, or you could even do it with a router table. It'd be really easy with a CNC machine, but since I don't have one, I'm going to find a more creative way to get there. The trick to it is that I want it to be good, usable on both sides, so I don't want to put a hole in this. I don't want to mark up the board surface itself at all. So that eliminates a couple of options right there. The other thing that I want to do with it is I want one side flat, and then I want a juice groove into the other side. My plan is to put together a simple little jig for the router that will have a plate that this gets stuck to, and the plate turns on a pin. That way I won't have a hole in my board. And then you just turn the circle against the bit on the router table. Once I have it turned round, I could just move the pivot point in by an inch or an inch and a half, put in a different bit, and spin it again, and I should be able to cut a perfect groove just, you know, that much inside of my outside edge. I didn't have a router bit that I believed would be capable of doing this. So I ordered a spiral upcut 1/4 inch bit that's supposed to have a 2-inch cutting surface on it. The reason I went with this, you know, upcut means it's cutting up towards the router, but in this case the router is inverted, so it's going to be pulling the chips down out of my table, which I figured was going to be better for preventing clogging, would be a better way of just keeping the thing going clean. So the next thing I need is the piece of scrap wood that will end up being the platform or the turnstile that the cutting board will stick to, and then this will get the hole in the pin in it that causes the rotation. So I just, rather than wasting the whole thing, I just need to find where the center of that circle is going to be, which is 5 3/8. And then I can punch a hole in this. I'm going to countersink the head so that it fits just a little bit underneath the surface. And then we can turn the first circle out of this piece of plywood. Whenever I need to stick two pieces of wood together like this, I use double-sided carpet tape that I found at the local hardware store. I really like this because it's really strong and it's also really easy to clean up after the fact. It's all ready to try out now. There's one thing that gives me just a little bit of concern here, and that is that my router table is just the fixed base for my router screwed to the underside of this piece of wood. So it's not a precise thing, it's not fancy, it works. What it does is when I need to change the height of the bit, I actually have to unlock it, which allows the whole spindle to have, the whole router inside the base to have just a little bit of slop to it, and then I have to crank the wheel to get it to lift up, and then I lock it back down. So I'm a little concerned that in that locking and unlocking, it's going to get a little bit of chatter in the finish on the outside of this. I have no doubt that it's going to get through it, it's going to be fine, but it'll be interesting. Well, I'm not sure if you're able to see this, but each little increment that I've been going up, my worry about that slop doesn't seem to be a big deal, because when the bit comes almost entirely out of the board on this end and I unlock it, its tendency is actually to tip to the left, tip away from the board, which is really proving useful. You can kind of see I've got just a little bit of a bite mark right there at the bit itself, but that I can sand out. Well, at this point I'm finished with that spiral bit, and judging by the surface on my now round cutting board, I would say it did a fantastic job. I'm just tickled with how this is working out. Now I need to switch to my other router bit so I can work on cutting the juice groove in. During this part of the process, I'm going to end up raising the router bit up through the sacrificial board that everything is turning on. When I get through it, it's going to have a ring pop off, and so I'm lifting the router bit a very small amount at a time until I get through it to try to keep that ring from causing any problems when it comes loose. So that's the ring popping off that I was looking for. I don't know if you saw that catch, but that's what I was trying to contain a little bit. So now that we've gotten through it, we can take that off. See, it didn't even actually cut all the way around. It broke before it got to the end, but now we're good to go. We did just barely start to cut into the cutting board itself, but now we can really start going. Well, it's time to decide if it worked out well and if it was worth all the extra effort to turn a square into a circle or not. Got a nice deep juice groove. We've got those handles that turned out pretty nice. We've got this flat. 10 5/8 all the way around. The surface here, you can tell that we took a few steps up with the router table, but I mean, this will buff out. Pretty much just have to take some sandpaper to it and clean it up. That'll come apart, that'll clean up really easily. We got one burn, and somewhere in here, right there, there was just a little bit of a jog. That must have been from loosening, adjusting, and tightening, lifting the router and tightening it back down again. It kind of did that thing where I didn't, you know, because the router bit was trapped between two pieces of wood, the lean that it was giving me that worked out so well with the spiral bit ended up digging into this just a little bit. But again, I can pretty much just sand that out so that nobody will ever even know it's there. Now I have a beauty of a little circular cutting board. So I think my jig works. Takes a little bit of effort and a few extra steps, but it gets me a little bit different piece before it's all over with. So now I'm going to have to sand this thing up and oil it and start using it.
Is it pretty now?
Well, you tell me.